Hi, this is Mimi Jankovich with Teach Florida, Teach Coalition. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm very honored to have just spectacular people on this call who I think you'll enjoy getting to know. We have Jayne Shapiro, who's a long-standing activist back in her days in California, where she ran an organization called Kids Safe and passed the Meghan's Law to deal with sexual predators on kids. It's now a national law, so we're very excited to now have Jayne here in Florida. She moved here to be with her 4 kids and immediately started getting involved with Teach Florida, Jewish Federation, APAC, and other important institutions around the Florida area, South Florida area. And so we're very grateful to have you. Thank you, Jayne, who's our hostess. Not host, whoa, I'm gonna start all over because that was completely ridiculous. Okay, sorry guys. Okay, Dean, just delete what I just said. Okay. Because
I like that. Can I do that in the middle of one of my answers? Just start over.
I'm so sorry. Okay. Hi, this is Mimi Jankovich from Teach Florida. Welcome to our call today with 3 political activists and strategists. Our host is Jayne Shapiro, a member of the Teach Florida Women's Caucus and an activist with us. Jayne comes from California, where she headed an organization called Kids Safe and passed the Meghan's Law dealing with sexual predators. It's now in law in all 50 states. She moved here to Florida to be with her children and immediately got very active with Teach Florida, the Jewish Federation, APAC, and other important institutions. She will be our host for our conversation with 2 of Florida's top Democratic, one top Democratic strategist and a top Republican strategist. I just want to stress before, Teach Coalition is a 501c3 organization. We do not endorse parties, but we are involved in getting out the vote, and we feel it's so important that people have a chance today to get some of the insider's view of the electoral and political process. So from there, I'm going to turn it over to Jayne.
Thank you, Mimi. Good morning, everyone. It's quite an honor for me, and I know everybody else, to have Tony and Christian here. And I'm excited to hear what they have to say. Let's introduce Tony first. Tony Cortese is a key Florida Republican fundraiser and strategist, who most recently was a driving force behind this year's Florida Republican House campaign that flipped 5 seats. Cortese and his team broke the fundraising record for the Republican Party's House Majority Committee this year. He just opened the Capital Resources, a consulting and fundraising firm in Tallahassee. Congratulations on opening up your firm, Tony.
Thank you.
Christin Ulvert is the founder and president of EDGE, a communications policy and political strategy firm, an expert in political messaging and public policy. Ulvert served on and managed several successful campaigns across Florida, from municipal and legislative races, including Daniela Cava Levine's successful race for Miami-Dade mayor this year. In regards to the format, I would like each person to answer the questions 2 to 3 minutes.
Is it a debate? Can I pose a question to Christian?
Of course.
I won't eat into your time if you don't eat into mine.
Deal.
Tony, let's start with you. Please share your background and why you're involved in politics.
Sure. And before I get started, I'll say a lot of our success this year was a credit to Speaker Sprowls, who was a bulldog and an extremely hard worker, and he was the driving force that made us work so hard to break those fundraising records and flip the seats. But as for me, I worked on my first political campaign in high school. It was a ill-fated state house race that did not make it past the primary. But I caught the bug a little bit, and when I came to FSU in Tallahassee, I got involved working with the legislature as an intern. Post-college, I worked on campaigns. I worked on House campaigns. Then I got involved in the legislature again, and for about 10 years worked primarily on the policy side for Marco Rubio, for Andy Gardner when he was Senate President, for Richard Corcoran when he was House Speaker. and then came back out again a couple years ago to work on House campaigns with Speaker Designate Sprowls.
That's impressive. Christian, please share your background and why you're involved in politics.
Absolutely. It's great to be with you all this morning, and great to see Tony. I think Tony and I started working in the legislature around the same time. That's where I got started in politics. But similar to Tony, I started getting involved in politics, ironically, in Miami-Dade County when I decided out of the blue to run for student government president of Miami-Dade County. And I got the real taste of politics. So I was the student voice for our students at the school board level. And from there, I actually went to Florida State as well, met Dan Gelber, who at the time was the incoming Democratic leader. And he totally changed my trajectory. I was going to get my master's in higher education administration and do student service leadership development on college campuses, but really connected with him and started working in the House Minority Office with him. And it just, for me, that was a moment that I caught very much the political bug, and been doing campaign work since then. Opened my firm 12 and a half years ago, and moved back to Miami from Tallahassee in 2009. And it's been an exciting journey. I mean, I often share with folks, we're lucky because we get a front seat at really history-making moments and defining moments in life and in government. And this year was really an exciting one. Just seeing Miami-Dade County elect the first woman mayor, and really seeing the energy and the excitement. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it really is my drive for good public policy and working with strong, committed leaders. And I think that applies really to both sides. When you find people who are passionate, whether it's myself on the Democratic side or Tony on the Republican side, you really see the difference in the work product, because we care ultimately about the policy. And that's, I think, the difference with folks like Tony and I, that we worked inside the legislature, we worked with policymakers. So you see the end goal is, yes, electing people, but it's to drive a policy agenda. So it's an exciting time.
Thank you very much. Do you work with the House and the Senate also?
With legislators, I do. Yeah, on the campaign side, I do. I've worked. I mean, I do work at all levels of government, and work right now. I'm working very closely with the incoming Senate leader on the Democratic side, Perry Thurston, someone I worked with 10 years ago when he was the incoming House leader at the time in 2011. So I do. It's where I started, so it's a big passion of mine, is working with legislators.
Thank you. Tony, given all your campaign experience, can you briefly share the most interesting thing that you can share?
That's true. Well, and Christian said it right. When you're involved in Florida politics, you're on the front lines of every issue that's important in American politics. And that's what, I can't tell you the number of times where I'll be doing something in the middle of the day and say to myself, a week ago, there's no way I would have predicted that I'd be dealing with this issue, and that's why we keep doing it, right? It's interesting. We don't know what every day is going to hold. So there's no shortage. I would say in 2010 and 2012, I did a lot of grassroots for Florida Senate campaigns, and grassroots was knocking on a lot of doors. And so most of the interesting stories in politics happen when you're actually talking to voters. So I've been, chased off of properties. I've had dogs chase me. I've had people invite me in. You get to experience, when you're working on multiple races at one time, the diverse demographics of Florida. So if you're walking one day in Miami and the next day in the Panhandle and then Jacksonville and the Villages, it's completely different people, completely different message, and that's multiple states in one here in Florida. And so I would say, and it's one thing you miss when when you start out, you start doing those grassroots things, you start walking door to door. And as you advance in your career, there's young kids that do that now, and we tell them where to go or you know, or tell them where it's important to be. But most of the fun stories are related to actual voter contact.
And Christian, this
Yeah.
past election, you both were focused forces behind winning campaigns. When did you start strategizing, and what worked and what didn't work?
Sure. You know, that's, you know, this is a moment of time where we reflect a lot, no matter, you know, we've all been in an election cycle where you win some and lose some. So you always reflect. But I do, you know, Tony mentioned, you know, we start at the bottom really, and the voter connecting is so important, right? That's where you really get a sense of what an election cycle is really feeling like and brewing. And for me, election cycles are defined by how we connect with voters. And a few years ago, it was very interesting. I was, you know, I always go knock on doors, you know, for any campaign, because it gives you a good read on what people are thinking. And I knocked on a door, and this young lady was like, "I'm not going to vote. I'm just not going to vote. I don't believe in the process. I don't believe in the system." And we start talking, and we realized that we went to high school together. She was a year younger than me, and she went to find her yearbook, and it said that I was most likely to work in politics. She had that, you know, for me, that, and that you know, for her to feel like you know, what are the chances or what are the odds that I would knock on her door, right? I could have gone to another area of the county or picked up another list. And she's become a loyal voter since, because she felt like it was like that moment that she had a personal connection. And I share that because it reminds us that, you know, for strategy and when you develop ideas, that's all important. But all those things that we do to build a strategy go back to making sure that we build our coalition of voters to go out and vote for the issue, causes, and candidates that we work for and believe in. And for me, like using the mayor's race, for example, and that's a conversation that Mayor Levine, Cava, and I started having, you know, 2 or 3 years ago, of the possibility. And it's not that she was decided that she was going to run at that moment, but, you know, it's a big county. I mean, Miami-Dade County is larger than 14 other states. The budget is $9 billion operational budget and a $6 billion infrastructure and capital improvement budget. So, I mean, that's a big undertaking. And I believe that the best campaigns are the ones that are thought out carefully, especially the bigger they are, the more you have to do that planning. So for using that, you know, that race as an example, I mean, we started building that strategy, you know, a few years ago. But the best campaign really is the one that is nimble and can adapt. And this year has proven to be the truest of the sense of being able to adapt, because campaigns were upended, right? And you know, in some ways, you know, in my period of reflection, I give more credit to Republicans who adapted and were more nimble and got back into the work of campaigns quicker than Democrats. And I think some of our results were, you know, reflect that the Republicans are just a little more nimble, actually a lot more nimble in responding. And it's not to say that, you know, we all didn't take the health crisis seriously. It's just, again, the best run campaigns and the best strategy are the ones that you have a master plan, but campaigns are evolving every day. Something new can come up that can potentially change the course of the strategy you built. But the most important piece is you go back to your top level strategy, because whatever what we came up 3 years ago in the mayor's race was true today of how we got to our end goal, which is to win. It's just a path that we got there. You know, we had some different twists and turns along the way.
Mm-hmm. Was she known before she ran?
You know, countywide, no. I mean, I actually was one of the folks that recruited her to run in 2014. Right. So she was only on the county commission for 6 years. And she wasn't widely known. She had been in the community for 40 years, right, doing a lot of grassroots work. She founded a major nonprofit, Catalyst Miami. She worked, you know, in different agencies and programs. So she had a network, But, you know, when we first polled Miami-Dade County, I think she registered at like 13% of voters knew who she was. And I think of those 13%, 90% of them were in her county commission district, right? So it is a big undertaking, but she embarked on it.
Thank you. And Tony, the same to you. This past election, you both were forced to get behind the winning campaigns. When did you start strategizing, and what worked and what didn't work?
Sure. Well, like Christian said, there was a lot that we had to make up and change in the middle of this year that we weren't anticipating changing. But I will say that Speaker Designate Sprowls on the State House level was very aggressive, and I would say on three fronts. Number one was fundraising. He wanted to break all the records of what had been done before. So that was our goal every month, was what was previous 2 years month over month goals, and hitting those goals, which when COVID hit proved to be a good thing because we were ahead of where we'd normally be on the fundraising front. Candidate recruitment was the second thing. We started very early on that because we didn't want to merely play defense because we're in the majority. We wanted to find what are those 4 or 5 seats where we can be on offense, and what kind of candidate do we need in those seats. So we went out very early in the off year and recruited candidates and actually endorsed in primaries, which to Speaker Sprowls' credit, or Speaker Sprowls' credit, at times in the past hasn't been done because it's kind of, well, we're not, we're gonna hands off, whoever comes out, whatever Republican comes out of the primary, will support them in the general election. And sometimes that is okay, and sometimes you end up with a C candidate beating a candidate in the primary, and then you're stuck with that candidate for the general election. So we wanted to make sure in the seats where we had a chance to be aggressive, we had the best possible candidate out of the primary. So I think we endorsed in 5 primaries, maybe 6, and those ended up being good candidates. I think one we didn't really have a chance to win, but all the others we ended up winning the general. And then grassroots, I think Christian mentioned it as far as jumping back into what would be traditional campaigning. We had a strike team on the state level that kind of came alongside each individual candidate's campaign, and so they were knocking their doors, but we had a group of about 20 that would go and hit different districts around the state, and they ended up hitting 600,000 doors statewide just in state house seats, and just in competitive state house seats, all in about 15 seats, they hit 600,000 doors. And we ramped that up in about May when we didn't know what the reception would be because of COVID, and there was and we had decisions to make because we didn't know what budget was going to come in. We didn't know if there would be, but we went ahead with what our original plan was to hire these people, get them on payroll, start planning, figure out the districts they need to be in, even though it was a little scary. So I'll give credit to the speaker on that front, to continue to push, even though we didn't know if we'd have the money to pay these people, and we didn't know if we would get the reception we hoped we would get at the doors.
Did you pay the people to go door to door?
Yeah, of course. Yes, we are. There's some volunteers on campaigns, but we wanted to have people who were motivated, and there's no better motivator I know of.
And when you go to interview a candidate, do they come to you, or do you pursue them, or is it both ways?
Traditionally, candidates who want to run for office would come to legislative leadership and say, I'm interested in running for this seat or that seat, to make sure they know who you are. The legislative leaders know who the candidate is. In some instances where we knew we needed a good candidate, we solicited people, and it was mostly a product of making the connections that they are already in the community. If it was a representative that was nearby, do you know anyone that lives in St. Lucie? Can you introduce me? Is there anyone? And to be honest, we found a lot of success with female candidates this year. And I'm sure Christian will attest. And a number of the candidates we recruited were women, and And what we've said is the reason why you have to start a little earlier is because men are a little more impulsive. We'll make the decision, we're going to run for office, then we'll figure out how to do it. Where women are, to their credit, are much more thoughtful. They want to figure out how they're going to win before they decide to do it. So you've got to start a little earlier to make sure that they want to be comfortable with running for office. And so we were very successful finding women that ended up taking back a number of seats for Republicans.
Interesting. Thank you. Christian, were there any unexpected bumps in the road?
Yeah, this year there were bumps every week. It was interesting. I mean, obviously, this cycle more than any, I mean, because every election cycle you can look back and say there were bumps along the way. This year was challenging because we had, multiple challenges that, impacted the election cycle. I mean, on our side, we started out the year with a very contentious presidential primary that really defined what the cycle was going to look like, right? There was a lot of, I hate the word division, but I mean, our party really was divided. There's so many candidates running for president that would, gave a lot of folks the different options. As I said, we had every flavor of Ben and Jerry's available to our Democratic primary voters. And that's not a bad thing, right? I mean, it was great because you saw a robust primary with ideas, and a team of rivalries is obviously shaping up in the new administration with Mayor Pete getting appointed Transportation Secretary, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris making history, and obviously joining the Biden ticket. So in the end, it works well, but that set a tone at the beginning of the year that was then matched with obviously a global pandemic that really redefined what campaigns look like, right? And I'm a big believer that campaigns, the strength of campaigns are drawn from energy that people bring and talent of getting together, right? At the end of the day, engaging through Zoom and digital platforms is great to continue conversation, dialogue, and connectivity, but the sense of energy really comes from putting people in a room and really building campaign plans and putting people out in the field. And this year also proved that the best tool campaigns have is the direct communication with voters at the door, right? And I think to the Republicans' credit, they finally caught up to what Democrats have been doing for a long time, which is knocking on doors. And then this year was the inverse. I mean, some of our folks are very conscious of the pandemic and the health risks. And there was division in our party on how to approach it. And that created another, major challenge because for our side, I mean, on the mayor's campaign and all the races I was a part of, we knocked on doors throughout the summer and in the fall, right? I made a decision that what the CDC guidelines were given was that you needed people not to be congregating. You needed them to wear PPE, and you needed to create distance. And I said, when you're going out knocking on doors, you're likely just with one other person, and they're usually on the other side of the street. So you got distance met. You knock on a door, and if you're you have hand sanitizer, mask, and gloves, and you take 6 to 8 feet back, you can still have a conversation with a voter at the door, still following all the CDC guidelines. And they said the best thing to do is outdoor activity. I'm like, well, usually canvassing 98% of the time is outdoor. The rarity of like a homeowner inviting you in to have a further conversation happens usually with a candidate, right? Not with rarely with a volunteer or a canvasser. So all these were bumps along the way that we had to address. And then the final one was, I mean, in the summer, America had a real reckoning on what racial injustice looks like in the country. And it created a lot of tension, and a lot of, I think, important dialogue has come from it, and we need to continue it. But also it changed some message frames for candidates, right? How you engage our minority communities became a top issue. How you build trust, especially in the African American community where there is little today with government institutions, became, a key conversation. And it happened in the summer, in the run up to, for us in Florida, was our August primary. And that was an important time when you're deploying strategies that campaigns had to be, again, going back to the point I made earlier, to be nimble, to be able to stick to a broader message, but bring it to the moment. And a lot of our candidates did it successfully because they understand and have a good pulse on their community. And I would say the last challenge, we've all, and I'd be curious to hear what Tony says, but we've all experienced partisan, tones and high level of partisanship in the closing weeks of a campaign. This year was, I think, the worst I've ever experienced. I think it was highly partisan. It was very tense election cycle. And not to say there wasn't enthusiasm to vote, because obviously there was, with a record-breaking number of votes cast in U.S. history, but it was just very tense. And, if you commented on the success of a Republican strategy, Democrats would descend and vice versa, right? I saw Republicans commenting on something good that, Democrats were doing, and they would descend on that Republican. And I think it's social media that is creating a more toxic environment politically, because look, I remember working in the legislature and building relationships with my counterparts in the Republican side, right? Like, I would communicate with Albert Martinez, who was a communications director for the speaker or the majority office, and an equal amount that I would communicate with my Democratic colleagues, just so there was synergy and understanding of what a day or a week would look like. If you ask folks today, that doesn't happen, right? That just, there's not that level of trust and communication. And that is, I think, part of a bigger challenge. And I think it was a major bump along the way this year. We got to get back to a place that we can look past the partisanship and just look at, we're people with policy ideas that differ, but we all come back to a moment for the greater good.
Or it should only happen. Tony, were there any unexpected bumps in the road for you?
Sure. And there was obviously this year much more than the typical bumps we expect in a campaign season. This year, more than ever, we were forced to say, let's focus on what we can control, because there's so many things that are outside of your control. We can't, especially in the state, we can't control the national mood of the electorate. We can't control how people feel about Donald Trump day to day. We can't control COVID. So if you let the things that are outside of your control, start to enter your mind, you're not going to get anything done. So the things we can control the candidates that we have. So that's why we endorsed early and tried to get behind people who we thought could win a general election. We can control how hard we're working. That's where we that grassroots messaging and really filtering it down by creating a campaign team of current members that would get a report from candidates every week. Where are you? How much have you raised? How many doors has your campaign hit? Created a culture within our current members of the legislature that they needed to be helping candidates. They needed to be, talking to them on a weekly basis. And then the other thing we can control is message. So as Christian said, it boils down to, what do people want to hear? What does the electorate want to hear from their elected officials? And so even when I have friends who are discouraged or withdrawn from the political process because of the things Christian talked about, whether it's social media or vitriol on the national level, I always bring it back to, what do you believe? And I go through an exercise of, do you believe government? What do you believe about the size of government? What do you believe about the tax dollars that government needs to operate? What do you believe about school choice? What do you believe about? And usually, in my social circles, those people find out they're more conservative than they thought. And maybe the people Christian's talking to find out they're more liberal than they thought. But I
you'd
think
be surprised.
right. But our candidates, if they're delivering the message in a way that is winsome, that people are going to be attracted to, that's something we can control. And in a year like this, that's what you have to focus on. What are the things that are in our control? Let's do the best we can. And in campaigns, there's no guarantees, so the chips have to fall where they do. And if you can sleep at night, at least if you've done well on the things that are in your control.
And that's a great point to what Tony says. I mean, it is, you got to stay focused on the things you control. And when you have strong candidates, you got to tune out the national noise. You got to tune out other factors, especially when you have a very strong candidate that is running a bigger race. So like in our mayor's race, Mayor Levine Cava overperformed Joe Biden in Miami-Dade County, which for our side is creating all levels of heartburn, right? Because Miami-Dade just, really underperformed, and there's a lot of theories as to why. But, the mayor and at the time candidate, Levine Cava, was very focused on getting out there in every sector of the county and building coalitions where she could. And the results proved it, because it's very rare for a down ballot race to overperform the presidential race. And she did. And she overperformed by over a point, and in some parts of the county she overperformed by larger margins. And it's to what Tony said, is that you got to just focus and drill down on what is the strong campaign tool you have, which is your candidate.
I didn't realize how important the candidate was.
Oh yeah.
I mean, obviously it is important, there's no question, but everything else that goes with it, a lot of work behind the scenes.
It is. That's what you got to believe in, the work you're doing, and you also have to believe in the candidates you work with.
And do you get that fire in the belly that the candidates get?
I do. I mean, it's like especially with the ones that I'm getting to know more. Like now, Dan Gelber is the mayor of Miami Beach, right? And I'm the one that encouraged him to run for mayor in 2017. And we have that personal relationship, and I know he is a strong leader. So, you do get that fire in the belly, and it's like you live and breathe it. My husband jokes that 70 days before an election, like there's nothing else being talked about in our house, right? Because it is literally, that's all I live and breathe it. And that's also the success of working with the right candidates and loving what you're doing, because imagine doing something you don't like or working with someone that you don't believe in. You will not live and breathe it. And it's not a good environment.
That's I think why we love campaigns. There's as competitors, there's a beginning, there's an end, there's a scoreboard, there's so as someone who's competitive, I like campaigns because you're going to win or lose. Whereas so much of legislative work, you can work on an issue for 5 years and maybe partially win and by getting a piece passed. And sometimes you get big legislative victories, and that's rewarding, obviously, but in a different way than campaign work.
And every election cycle is different, which is also what's exciting, is that the fundamentals stay the same, but every election cycle, I can't go back and say one election cycle was exactly like the other, and that's what's very, I think, interesting and unique about the industry, is that you do have a start date and an end date, which is nice, and then you also have uniqueness every election cycle.
Tony, what would you like to tell our community about voting and being part of the political process?
Sure. Well, I'll repeat what I said a moment ago. Is obviously it's important, and we try to differentiate on the state level with what's happening on the national level, because I think, as Christian would attest, Tallahassee is much different than Washington, whereas the current environment in Washington, it's more important to try to get on TV 3 times a week than it is to necessarily pass anything. In Tallahassee, there is a level of bipartisanship now, and we get things done. We pass bills, we pass a budget every year, we have a constitutional mandate, If there's a problem in your community, there's a much better chance of it being solved in Tallahassee than being solved in Washington. So people that are, hesitant to get involved on the state level, that's my first message. And then secondly, I go through the same thing. What do you believe? And if you believe those things strongly, then you should be involved. So finding the candidates that align most closely with your beliefs is important. So there's a lot of reasons to be involved, and discovering those reasons without being discouraged is the challenge. And I think if they're watching this, they probably are well on that path to discovery.
Thank you. And Christian, what would you like to tell the community about voting and being part of the political process?
Sure. The political process works best when people are engaged. I mean, and the way you do it is, being tuned in to activities like this, and also knowing that policymakers depend on hearing from everyday people, industry leaders, thought leaders, to really make decisions. And you have to be engaged, and you have to be part of the process to make sure voices are heard. And I think that's where sometimes there's a disconnect, where people feel like, well, why aren't these decisions being made? And then you ask, well, did you reach out to your legislator? Did you reach out to your congressperson? Did you organize like-minded voices to present ideas and policies? And more often than not, the answer is no. And you can't allow that to be the answer. You have to lean in, you have to engage. And for me, if you're going to engage in the policymaking process, the first step is you got to engage in the voting process. For me, if you're going to engage in the latter and not the former, then you're not being fully engaged, because it starts with voting.
Do you find younger people more involved these days than before in the political system?
Yes, I would say they're more engaged, and I think that's a tool of social media and new digital engagement. But truthfully, I mean, when I started out, in college 21 years ago, I felt that there was a level of engagement as well. It's just now you're able to see it more. Mm-hmm. The desire to vote and the accessibility of voting, I think, has made it easier for younger people to get engaged. But I always love, because the young voters are the myth in politics, where everybody feels like they're going to be able to be the one that drives out the greatest turnout. I would say this year we probably had more engagement than years past. And I think that is a symptom of, obviously, the pandemic has really impacted everybody. And ironically, younger voters are the ones that felt the impact in some ways greater economically, because their industries probably got hit the hardest. So you had the level of engagement there. And two, the reckoning that we had over the summer that needed to happen with racial injustice and inequities really brought more young voters to the table. But I've always felt there's been a level of engagement. I think it's more visible now.
And Tony?
I would agree. I would agree with that. I think there's always a challenge with young voters to get engaged, and I would call it a superficial engagement a lot of times, where they are involved because of feelings. I don't like President Trump. I do like President Trump. And I think that's a cultural change over the last 15 to 20 years about feelings are more important than facts. But that's why I like I told you, I go through trying to get people to think about what they actually believe, not who they like and don't like. But yes, we work as hard to get every possible demographic as involved as possible. And it'll be a challenge this cycle and next cycle and every cycle into the future.
That's interesting. Thank you. Well, I'd like to wrap this up by thanking both of you for being here. It was so informative and a real delight. And I wish we could do it again. I wish we could stay longer.
We'll do it again in 2 years.
Count on me, whatever you need.
And Christin Ulvert. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Mimi,
Thank you
back
also,
to you.
Jayne. We're really grateful. It was a great, and Tony and Christian was a really informative, and even for me, who's involved in the process, I really got some great insights, and I love getting to hear what motivates you and your experiences. I want to thank everyone for watching this. We have a great community involvement. We haven't shared this fact a lot, but 75% of our voters that we track had actually voted prior to Election Day, which is a tremendous turnout. And the numbers haven't come out yet for what happened on Election Day, but I have a feeling we're going to be having one of the highest turnout rates in the voting bloc world in Florida. So I'm really excited to see that, and I encourage people to continue to work with us. We're doing a lot more work to reach out to our legislators. Just please reach out to us to get involved, and we look forward to your continued support and involvement. Thank you both very much, and thank you, Jayne. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.